Yes.
One of the things that I do believe will be part of the so-called crisis, if they probably can do it in an election, probably call it solve immediately, will be probably the spending aspect. It's well known that we have this that's probably larger than any since World War II, and that isn't a problem that's unique to the Obama administration. But we did run a balanced budget as recently as 2000. And one of the things that I'm worried about is what's the way back? 70% of the government spending is locked into entitlements. We're fighting a war on terror that's still right now in 2 theaters, and I don't know of any administration that's run a balanced budget while fighting a war. And not to mention the fact that the bureaucracy just seems intractable. Well, I mean, in the 1990s, Republicans tried to abolish the Department of Education, and they just couldn't do it.
A lot of challenges there. Look, I think take entitlements. I have been on the whole, as a political matter, very wary of a frontal attack on entitlements over the last 20 years or so, and when I've been involved in politics. And I just thought it wasn't urgent. It was not, the political groundwork had not been laid for it, and I don't think it had been. And I think we saw this with Bush in 2005, when Bush, in a way not unlike Obama, took his re-election with 51% of the vote, which was a re-election really, I think, based on greater confidence in his managing of the war on terror than Kerry, and took that as a mandate for Social Security reform. It was a sensible reform proposal, I'm inclined to think, but the public didn't think that's kind of what they were voting for, particularly in 2004. I think they would have been open to looking at it and exploring it, but when Bush came out as his #1 legislative proposal in 2005, people thought, really? I don't know, was that what we were for? And of course it collapsed, and it really began, I think, the collapse of the Bush presidency, honestly, in its second term. You can't get reelected and say, this is my #1 domestic policy proposal, and have a Congress controlled by your own party, never even bring it to a vote in committee, let alone to the floor. So I think you've got to be careful. So I've been wary on the entitlement issue. I would say now, with the deficits we have, and with the projections we have, and with the educational process that's gone on thanks to Obamacare, you can, for the first time, imagine a Republican presidential candidate running successfully, in my view, in 2012 on some version of the Paul Ryan big think entitlement reform. And I am open, I'm not entirely convinced, but I am open to the notion that I think it's probably the right thing to do substantively, but it's even the right thing to do politically. I don't think in 2010 it makes a lot of sense for some Republican congressional candidate who is not going to be able to study up on this enough to really explain all the ins and outs to say, hey, that huge Obama plan to revamp everything that was developed at Brookings, that's ridiculous and crazy, but I've got my own huge untested plan that was developed at Cato, and let's impose that on the country. That's not the mood, especially in the off-year election. And the mood in the off-year election is, let's not do Obamacare, let's make some small changes, and let's not ruin the medical system the healthcare system in this country. But if you could stop Obamacare, if you could have a couple of reasonable changes that seem to make sense, I think you could have a much broader mandate for entitlement reform in 2012. But again, I think it has to be sold carefully. People have to be persuaded of it. It is not, conservatives have as bad a tendency almost as liberals of, hey, my favorite think tank has a 72-page paper here, and if only I could jam this down the throats of every citizen and make them read it, then we could just do it, and it's a much more complicated political system than that. People do have expectations that aren't crazy based on the current system. It's not irrational to respect those expectations. I fought very hard for school choice. I was at the education department for years and got very frustrated by suburbanites who wouldn't go for a full-scale voucher system. But of course, these people had worked very hard to try to find a school system for their kids that was good, and they'd paid extra to live in a suburb that had good schools. And it's a little much to ask citizens, hey, forget about all that, that extra job you took for 8 years and the money you borrowed from your parents to buy the house in that area so your kids could go to a decent public school. We have a study that shows that ultimately general school choice would be better, and it's selfish of you to stand in the way. I mean, the conservatives need to be much, the lesson I learned from that is you've got to be more incremental and careful in thinking through how you get from here to there in politics. So short answer to your intelligent question, I think on entitlements, there could be a moment in 2012 where 2012 could be a moment where one could really have an ambitious agenda. I'd say on bureaucracy, I think things may have fundamentally changed. I have, again, never been, as much as some of my conservative friends, a huge basher of federal government employees, and I've even been a little squishier on unions than due to some atavistic, liking of them from my great uncle who, had some, managed to make a very good living in some union job in New York, which he never had to show up for. So we all thought that was great in the family, since he was, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to support his wife and kids. He's got good for nothing great uncle. And so I've always been soft on unions. But I would say that people do have the sense that, gee, everyone in the private sector, a lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people have had real pay cuts. A lot of people have had real sacrifice. And the entire public sector, no one really takes a pay cut. No one has, it's just like totally now mismatched. The public sector employees now have greater job security and higher pay than private sector employees. And that's like a little crazy. There's a case for giving them greater job security if they are making a financial sacrifice, losing an upside income. But if public sector employees are both paid better, have better pensions, and have more job security for the same job, basically, same level of job, it's a little crazy. And I would say I think there may be support. California may test this fall a little bit for a pretty serious assault. It can't be mean-spirited, obviously, but a pretty serious attempt to get public sector unions under control. At the state level, again, I've been struck by this just reading up a little the last few months. The state and local budgets, it really is the public sector employee unions that are a huge part of the problem. And I think you could have a case now in this crisis for doing things that were politically somewhat suicidal 10 or 20 years ago. But again, that needs, this is not, different politicians will think this through in different ways, and let's see what happens in some of these different states. But I think it's a moment where you could imagine, sort of like welfare reform. There's 20 years where everyone said, we need welfare reform, Charles Murray wrote books, and then there came a moment where finally the political stars aligned in the 90s. I think that could be that case now on public sector bureaucracies and public sector unions. I don't think the war on terror, the truth is, net defense spending, even including the wars, has not gone up much in the last decade, including war spending. Education department spending went up more than defense spending under Bush, and continues to go up more under Obama. Now, you can make a separate argument that we shouldn't be fighting the wars, or that we shouldn't spend 5% of GDP on defense and foreign policy, which is about what we spend. I personally think, if anything, that's a little low. But there are fiscal conservatives who will want to say, we really need to curb defense spending. But truth is, even with the wars, it's $700 billion, maybe $730 this year. It's not up much. The deficit's 1.3. It's the entitlements that are out of control, not defense spending. In the Reagan years, we spent 8.5% of GDP on defense. Now we spend 4.5% or so. So I myself, as I say, I'm more on the other side of this, and think we're doing it. We're perilously close to the line where we're not going to be able to sustain the forces we need and the weapons we need. But these are all debates that conservatives can have among themselves to some degree, and of course with others out there. But I think it is a moment where some of these bigger ideas that have been politically undoable in the past may be doable over the next few years.